welcome back to the AI Product Operating System series. Today is week 4, and we're going to talk about pillar 4, actually. Look at that, lines right up. It's awesome. So the interesting thing about this, so we've done, like I said, this is week 4. If you go out to Accelerated Innovation to our YouTube channel, you can catch up on the other webinars. We put the videos out there. All right. And so what we're going to be talking about this week is this is where, we talked about getting product discovery, identifying what we want to build, and then going to build it. What we're going to talk about this week is this is where the confidence is earned, right? Not assumed, right? So we're going to talk through how we've been basically building data all the way through so that when we're ready to deploy, that we're making an educated decision. It's not just, hey, it feels good. We get a whole team of people together to get the release out the door, right? By this point, we should feel pretty confident that we're ready or we're not, right? And so today what we're going to do is talk about what it means to be, to ship safely. So again, my favorite slide, right? I want to talk about, everything we're talking about is really from the AI product operating system is how do we get AI first into our life cycle? And by doing that, what we want to do is decrease the amount of time that a human has to touch things, right? And so in this pillar, this is where the highest payoff is, right? We've basically been gathering evidence and gathering numbers all through the first 3 pillars, and now we can use that to leverage some decisions in this process, right? And so, the 85% is, hey, just hold on to that number for now. And what I'm going to do is over the next couple of slides, try to explain how we're getting to that 85% and what we need to do to safely do that, right? So shipping isn't the finish line. It's the start of the evidence, right? So think about that for a little bit. What happens is that what we've been working towards is everything that we've been doing so far have been assumptions, right? We're assuming that this is a product, we've tried to validate that with our customers. We've been gathering evidence as we've been going. And so now the accumulation of that evidence tells us to move forward. And so now we're going to move forward, right? And so once we move forward, what are the things that are going to happen that we couldn't tell while we were still developing inside the lab? And so let's go back and talk about some of the issues that we were seeing, right? Again, out of the Ferris report, speed is up, right? Engineering workflow, it's going really fast. Speed is popping up everywhere. Task throughput is up. Epic completion is up. But then we have to look at the price that we're paying, right? The number of incidents and PRs are also up. And then what we also noticed in this survey is that deployments actually fell during that same time frame, right? And so if our goal is to deploy software, all these other numbers are great, but we're actually releasing less percentage of the things that we've gotten to this point, right? And so it's almost like, we bought speed on credit, right? And so now this pillar is going to talk about, how do we start to, live off of our cash card instead of our credit cards, right? And so these cohort, these are deltas, not targets, right? We don't want to, these aren't our aspirational numbers. So some of the things that we're going to talk about is we're going to go through here, and I'll go through these. Basically, this is the agenda, right? We're going to talk about why I think this split is 85-15. We're going to talk about the decision to deploy and how we have information to validate that, how we roll out in stages, monitoring for signals as it gets done, and then think about the scale, operating at scale with this evidence, right? And so, we talk about, you'll see me talk about R2 pilot. And so the thing is that R0 and R1, if you remember, I think we talked about it last week, are, the deterministic tests at R0, which are like our test-driven tests or automated tests. R1 is more of the behavioral kind of things, behavior-driven development. Our Gherkin user testing by our QA team, maybe using Playwright, whatever that is. And so, we've gathered all that evidence and we feel good about it. When we start talking about R2 deployment, that's where we're finally going to get into a controlled stage deployment, either in some sort of an alpha, limited pilot, or controlled beta, right? So basically, we want to think about a phase launch because there are some things, and we'll talk about them in a minute, that we just don't know while we're in our little incubated environment that we call development and staging, right? So now, again, this is a design target, right? Not a rigid rule. If you don't get to 85%, that's not really the point. But what you want to do is you want to think about what are the three things that the humans need to do in this process, right? One is we need a deployment call, right? All of the data can be great, but it comes down to human. Are we ready to deploy? What do we do if there's pressure to escalate? So how do we handle that? And then the scaling judgment. How do we determine how many people to send this product out to begin with? And the point isn't to have fewer people involved. It's just to have the machines watching everything, so the humans can decide what things matter, right? What things do we need to get involved with if we get challenged, right? And this is what is happening to us now, right? Like we're seeing this that we're getting all these changes, and when we talk about a PR, remember that's when changes go into development. We create what's called a pull request, which is basically a request to say, hey, this chunk of code is ready to go into production. We need somebody to validate it. Currently, that's usually a senior level developer, right? And so what we're seeing with this influx of PRs, because of the coding agents moving so fast, is that we're getting to the point where some of those PRs aren't being reviewed at all. So we're running this process and we're just deploying into production, right? And so that to me is the scariest statistic of all of them, right? It's one thing to have a lot of them. Maybe we need more senior developers to look at it. We talked about other ways to kind of resolve that problem. Maybe we have some agents helping us look at that. But currently in the industry, what's happening is we have a glut or a bottleneck of these PR requests, and some of them are going all the way into production without being reviewed. So I'm not going to go through all these, but basically there's 6 questions that we really need to go through, and this is really our readiness checklist, right? So is it safe, right? Are the guardrails active? Are failure modes known and controlled, right? And at the end, once we do this, we should be able to, as we go and deploy something, anything we deploy, we should be able to build a one-pager at the end of it and answer all these questions, right? Short, hey, guardrails are in place. This is what we did. Is it supportable? How, who's the triage ownership? How's that handled? Are we monitoring? How are we observing this? And basically all 6 of these things should show up in a follow-up email after deployment, right? And so the idea is that this shouldn't be a hard thing to do, because we've been collecting this evidence and accumulating it since the define and design state pillar, right? And so basically the review is just us assembling this information. And these 6 questions, they should come out, like I said, as a one-pager in a follow-up email. And it shouldn't take long. It should be how we made the decision, and you follow it up in an email. So we have 4 named outcomes, right? And really what we used to see, I think the middle 2 are the interesting ones, right? Deploy with constraints or remediate, right? And the deploy with constraints could be that process of understanding what we need to remediate, right? Currently, what we used to do is basically go or no go, right? We either deploy it or we don't deploy it. So now what we want to start thinking about is, if we have really good R0, R1 results, we know what any known issues are. And are we going to approve those exceptions and constrain it? Or are we going to say, hey, we know about these things. We don't want to deliver it to our large population, but let's give it to this set of users. We can tell them about this one particular thing that we're still working on, but let's get people touching the product so we can get some feedback on it. Right. And so so now you want to be thinking about these 4 named outcomes instead of a go or no go. And one of the reasons we can do this, again, it's because we have the data. We should know exactly what those constraints are, right? We're not coming into a meeting at the last minute and a product manager brings up a concern and we're like, well, yeah, we noticed that too. But by waiting to bring it up and not having the data behind it, it's a natural response to go, well, what else is under there that we don't know about, right? And so what we want to do is anytime we see a constraint, we want to make sure we're exposing it, so we're making valid decisions. And so what happens is that we want the burst to hit us in a pilot, not when everybody gets it, right? So if you think about it, if we have an NFR that talks about a non-functional requirement that talks about this should be able to handle up to 100,000 users in 5 minutes. Kind of, I mean, I know some of your systems are way bigger than that, but these are the numbers that are in my head. So 100,000 users within like 3 minutes. And maybe we didn't test it exactly like that, right? We tested constraints, like if a lot of people used it, but we didn't check that, hey, if it was running at 20,000 and then all of a sudden it went up to 100,000 and dropped back down to 20,000, what happens, right? We don't want that to occur to us in production, right? Because it becomes a bug then, right? It becomes a problem. So what we want to think about is stages 2 and 3. This is where the R2 evidence is being collected, right? This isn't an extra stage. It's part of the deployment process, right? And so we want to get it out, have a couple customers using it, see what happens, and hopefully we catch any of these kind of spikes or things that we either didn't test for or we're incapable of testing inside of our environment. So the confusion might be that, like, if you think about an R2, it's not really a 5th stage, right? We've decided that this is going into production, and it's really the exit of the evidence stage, right? So we've gone through and we've looked at the R0 and R1, or yeah, R0 and R1, right? We've looked at the test-driven development. We looked at our tests. We've had QA check it. We've gone through our behavioral tests. Maybe we've had some users touch it in a staging environment. But at this point, we're pretty happy with it. And so what we want to do is we need to get it out there and get to the things that only real users can do. So for example, trust. And until a user uses it, they don't know if they trust it. Are they going to adopt it, right? We think they're going to use the feature, but are they? And then what is really the true cost to the customer? If it's something straightforward, like it's using up tokens for an LLM, what's that cost look like? Maybe it's a cost of change, right? So there are a lot of things that we can't tell internally until we give it to some customers, right? So we want to make sure that, and that's what the R2 stage is. So this isn't further testing, right? We've tested it, we feel good about it, but now what we want to do is get some feedback from actual users and the system live, right? Obviously, we'd like to do that with fewer people than more, right? Because anything that happens to us before a user touches it, we can consider it a bug. But if it gets out to a user, it's a trust issue, right? We don't ever want that in our products. So, we have these basic these signals, right? And so I think the two most important, if you look at these kind of by column, task completion is when users actually getting the outcome that they came for, right? So they go in to complete a task in your product and it works, and it's a reasonable cost to them, whether it's time, whether it's token, whatever cost that the client or the users would put against that. And then you take these other pairs down the thing, but the reason I bring up the first two is they're usually the ones that are the most under monitored, right? We have to, one of the things that we need to do as we're building our systems, some teams are really good at it, some aren't, is that we need to know we want to measure these things so we can instrument our code to get these type of metrics out of it, right? Like, how do I know a task has been completed? Is there a clear workflow and the task can end? Should I log that? How do I log that? And then cost. What am I doing in cost? Am I tracking response time per request, or am I tracking token use per request? These are all things that if we get that information back, we can do things about it, right? Maybe it's taking too long, or maybe we're not caching prompts, and so they're churning up tokens faster than we expected, right? So what are the things that we can do? But if we don't measure that, we don't know it. And then the second thing we want to do is we want to start looking at, failed or weak outputs, right? Responses that miss or barely clear the bar. And then any kind of edge or boundary cases that we're missing. So any of these things that come back as like low confidence responses, right? We want to make sure we're surfacing those. If we don't, what happens is they turn into hallucinations, right? Because if our internal system is looking at something, and if it's a Gen AI app, if it's not positive about the response, we've all seen this, where it'll come back and it'll give us some response and it'll sound really good. So what we need to do is put guardrails into the system that comes back and says, hey, I have a response for you, but my confidence level is like 50% or 55%. At least this way, we're not hiding it from anybody. And then again, if we should be measuring that. And if we're starting to get a high rate of low confidence responses, probably need to do something in the application to fix that, right? But in the meantime, what it does is it protects our users from running off and using information that is low confidence based, right? And again, the term hallucinations, we've heard this before, where basically, what these a lot of the the Gen AI applications, really what they're doing is they're just predicting the future from a language, from a corpus of data, and then it's making some prediction as to what it thinks is the right answer. So we'll constantly bring back really confident answers. And so it's our job when we're building those systems to make sure that it's got some groundedness and it's within a confidence score that we have, right? But again, we need those metrics as we go out into the system so that we can make changes. So, and when we start thinking about metrics, this has kind of shifted in the industry over the last, I feel like it's months, but it's probably been over the last year, especially as we started using more and more coding agents. Things are moving too fast for humans to validate on their own. So again, if you think of these as columns, as pairs, what we want to do is, if we talk about deployment frequency, like how often do we ship to production, we want to marry that with the change failure rate. Like shipment, if it ships and it had to be rolled back, or there had to be a hot fix put out, right? We need those measures to go in pairs, because it doesn't help me to deliver things really fast to keep breaking the system, right? There's nothing more annoying than getting constant updates in a product, and every time you touch it, it breaks, right? And then all of a sudden, at the end of the day, everything works, right? Nobody is excited about that product, right? So if we deploy, what's the failure rate? If we can deploy faster and keep that deployment rate down, then that's a good thing. And we talk about this, back in the day before coding agents. This is how people would determine if they could increase their velocity, right? If you had a team and they wanted to increase their velocity, what we would do is look for escape defects. So if they increase the amount of thing, basically increasing velocity means if I could deliver 50 points of work, or let's say 10 items of work in a sprint, and I want to try to stretch and deliver 12 items instead, what I would do is I would take my measures. I'm measuring quality. I do 10 items and I don't have any defects. 10 items, no defects. 10 items, no defects. I go up to 12, still no defects. So I can probably continue. So I do another sprint, 12 items, no defects. So things seem to be going well. I had a 13th item. Now I want to try to do 13, and defects start to come out the other end. All right. So that means probably that that's too much for the team to do and deliver quality software. That's basically exponentially more of a problem when we have coding agents involved, right? And AI driving things through. So we get excited about cycle time, but everything that we're doing now it needed before, but there were ways that we would catch it. But more than ever, we need to pair these metrics as we go, right? We should be checking this every deployment, every time we check in code daily, twice a day, right? So, basically we have one connected flow, right? So while things happen in increments, we're going to take in things and we're going to do some intake. There's going to be some triage on severity, who owns it, how does it get escalated, who resolves it, and where does the communication go, right? Now we can also run this with AI in the middle, right? And I'll talk about that in a second, right? So we have 5 outcomes now, not 2, right? Pause and retire are legitimate results. They're not failures. They're trying to pause or just decide not to move forward anymore is a good result if it's based in evidence. Like, why did we retire? Nobody's using it. It's costing us to maintain it. And so now what's happening is that if we go through this and we look at the scaling plan, now we're ready to optimize. So if we go through these and the 5 outcomes are that we have evidence that supports a wider ramp, it's very promising, and but maybe we need some constraints. But then now when we exit, we're ready to optimize. So as we come out of this gate, we're basically saying we think we have a good system, and we're going to collect metrics, right? We're going to collect metrics that are going to prove and show us how we have to optimize the system, right? It may be feedback loop from defects that are coming in. Could be a feedback loop from maybe we went to a limited set of clients and we started seeing some bursts that either brought the system down or made us nervous. But if we feed those all back in, all the way back, even in some cases, we would go back to the discovery engine, right? So we feed that into our discovery engine and take a look at that and make a determination as to whether or not that's really a problem that's going to affect our customers, right? Just because the customer originally said that they wanted it done in like 5-second response time, as they start using the product and start to see the value, maybe they relax that response time requirement, right? I've noticed this with some of the newer models that came out. I've gotten so used to getting quick responses back, but if the model's going to think more and give me a much better response when I get back, I'll wait 20 seconds, I'll wait a minute, right? And so what we want to do is continuously evaluate that. So it comes back in, maybe it looks different than our original requirement, but now we have an opportunity to assess that. Maybe it's call a customer and validate the response that they expect. Maybe it's create a prototype and show them what it would take. You can easily create a prototype that shows them asking a question, and you can put a delay in it of 25 seconds to see how they react, right? And so that you can do all those things if you have the data coming in. The other is if we have defects coming in, we can use AI as a triage system, right? Working with some clients today that a defect will come in, it'll go into a triage queue. And right now what they're doing is they're in the middle of the triage queue, mostly because it's new and people want to make sure that it's doing what they want, right? So it comes into the triage queue and they take a look at it and they think it's safe for AI to fix it. So they'll assign it to, they created a user that's an AI user, right? Developer. So they'll assign that to an AI developer and they'll go through and automatically fix and to create a basically it'll create the fix and then create a PR for somebody to review, right? And so the idea is that what percentage of those can we start moving to the AI so we have less people in that mix, right? So if we didn't have good metrics and good feedback coming into the system, it would be very difficult to do that kind of work, right? So this ready to optimize, ready to really tighten up our product is a key important date. Key and important. They're basically the same one. So let's talk about, just briefly, we talked about this AI support assistant last week, right? And so, we talked about, it was a RAG assistant that it was answering internal product questions, and it was also answering questions for the end user, right? And the numbers down here are illustrated, right? So let's say that we went out and we did an R2 release of this, and 62% of the the tickets got deflected. So they basically didn't go to a live person. They went to an AI chatbot. And the groundedness, right? You want to pair these things, right? Because if it's grounded and you're deflecting to the AI, it's probably a pretty good response, and users are going to be happy, right? If we didn't have this groundedness, we could still be deflecting things, but we could be hallucinating and telling customers things that aren't really true, right? And so the point of this is that a wrong answer in the staging environment is a bug that we have to fix, but a wrong answer that gets into production is a customer that we lost trust in, right? Or they lost trust in us, right? And so we want to think about this. We can have a stage rollout, and think about this is an interesting one too, because it's not only internal users, but it's external users. So it could be that we roll it out, and we're going to roll it out to some of our internal support reps, and we also roll it out to some customers, a limited set that come to the website. And then maybe it's great for the people come to the website, but it's not so great for the internal pilot team, right? So we have to take all of that into consideration, and maybe we bifurcate the way we end up doing the deployment. But we wouldn't have known that if we didn't run an R2 pilot, right? To get real questions from real users. I mean, we go through this with our, we're putting a knowledge assistant out on our website. And, if we ask the questions, like we all know what questions to ask, right? Because we're very familiar with our products and our website. But the second somebody else asks a question that isn't in that realm, we're not really sure what the response is going to be. We think it's going to be okay, right? But until we have people that come in and just randomly ask you questions, we don't know how that's going to work. So we want to make sure we do that. And then the last thing is you definitely want to have some sort of monitoring. We talked about this before with evaluation-driven development. Teams have gotten better about putting evaluations in their pipeline. And when I talk about evaluation-driven development, specifically, I'm talking about Gen AI applications right now, is that when we test applications before, right, that they were deterministic, it was a yes or no answer, right? We used test-driven development. We had tests that we could tell on or off, or is this the right answer? And we would get a corpus of those tests. And every time we did something, we would run through those tests. We'd have a series of integration tests, and they would validate the responses. As we get into more generative responses, and you get probabilistic type answers, which is, I get a paragraph. Well, as you know, if you use any of the chat bots, right? Any of the chat applications, ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, the paragraph, you could ask the same exact question and the paragraph will be slightly different. Maybe contextually the same, but you can't do a one-to-one comparison. So you need a way to evaluate that, and with some sort of confidence score, right? So that's what we mean when we talk about evaluation driven development. So there's typically another LLM that will check the response. There are different things that you do for groundedness, make sure that it's getting information that you've approved for it to use to answer the question. And then what's happened is that in development, we've been good about using that, but it needs to also run in production. Because as things change, right, you get more information, more customers ask more questions. If you for some reason, not sure why you do this, but if for some reason you upgraded the model without running it through a series of tests, the answers will change, right? And so you need to make sure that you're running, if not for every response, but in general, you want to be running against responses. And then as you deploy agents, you want that happening. And then that information needs to be fed back into the system. So that's what I mean when I talk about, monitoring accuracy and groundedness. You want to have all this basically being pushed back into whatever your monitoring system is, right? Datadog, whatever. And then running some analysis out on that on a regular basis. So if you don't have release confidence, then I don't know what you're doing. I've been on too many calls, man. I'm sure some of you have been in this situation where you're on a call at like 10 o'clock at night, and there are no less than 30 to 40 people on the call, right? and you're going through, you've decided to deploy, but if you need 30 people on the call, there's probably some people that are worried about something going wrong, right? Which is never fun. But you have a case here where you may have a rate limiter that it passed every test and it got shipped, right? And that rate limiter in production, there was a traffic burst, and it happened in production, but never happened in your testing environment. So in production, you don't see it, and the side effect was, instead of it alerting somebody, or even it might even be better to have the system come down, none of that happened. It just started to silently drop data, right? Because it couldn't keep up or whatever reason. And this gets discovered much later, and it's usually discovered by the customers, right? They've been running the system for a couple of days. They start to notice some weird things. They're not, the numbers don't see that up exactly, or whatever application they're doing. And so the problem with that is that the code was fine, right? And everybody, everything you checked looked good. But in production, you hit a case that nobody thought about in tests, right? So this goes back to the idea that you want to have some ability to do these limited deployments. And we talked about the fix back in slide 9, I think it was. But basically, if you have a stage rollout and this happens, you can control it, right? Usually if you're doing a stage rollout, you're monitoring things a little bit tighter anyway. But if it happens and you're watching this and you see these records getting dropped or whatever, you can do something to fix it, right? If it's in production, everything stops, right? And in a lot of cases, if it were in production across thousands of users, you may have to bring the system down, right? And that to me is catastrophic. So as usual, what happens is we have these, we have 8 lanes that run underneath all the pillars. Now, for this pillar specifically, it's architecture leads, right? Again, we've been gathering evidence all the way through engineering, the evaluation criteria, and any operational data. The solution, guardrails, and all that, they're all active underneath the system, but this is what takes us by focusing on the engineering, the evaluation, and moving the operational data back in. This is what helps us start to move this away from 56%, 50 to 60%, up to 85%. The only way that it's safe to run at that level of the AI having control is if you have the metrics and the proof and the history in place, so that as things go, you can build confidence in the system. And then that helps you build confidence in the AI. One of the things that it's easy to see locally, if you do any kind of, if you're doing any kind of software development or using Claude code to build prototypes or anything like that, codecs, anything like that, what you'll notice is when you first start using it, you're reading every line that it's coming back. It's saying, hey, I'm getting ready to do this. I did this. Are you okay with that? And you review your the diffs. Eventually, you get to the point where over and over again, you're like, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. So you start to build confidence in, and then you understand what checkpoints you need, right? So now if I'm doing any kind of software development, I have it build a plan, and it's got increments that I go through. And so what I let it do is I let it run through all the way through an increment, and then it stops. And then that way, what I can do is I can commit to code and I can see what's changed. Now I can just read through it. And I'm pretty sure that it's doing the right thing. I don't need to stop it every step of the way. That's what we'll start to see in our larger systems as we start to allow AI in and understand where do the humans need to be, where do the people, I should probably call them people instead of humans, where the people need to be to kind of throttle, guardrail, and make decisions, right? So the system just doesn't run off on its own, and we don't have any idea of what the effect is. So, confidence is earned in production, right? During the development and testing, you feel pretty good about it, but until things go, I've deployed a lot of products into production. I always feel good about it. I always test as much as I can, but there's nothing more nerve-wracking than releasing your baby out to the wild and see what they're going to do, right? It's like letting your 16-year-old drive. He's okay. Like, you've been taking him out. He's been driving. He seems responsible, but you don't know what's going to happen. He goes out on those country roads. I don't know. But so want to make sure that, we have our readiness review. We've been collecting evidence all the way through, right? We know it's a good, we're pretty sure it's a good product. We talk to our customers up front. And, we have their evidence. Maybe we did some prototyping with them and decided how and what feature we were going to build. We moved it into a governed AI delivery. And, we put guardrails around it, and we took a look at, validated, ran some tests, understand, whether or not we need to remediate anything, or if we need a limited rollout, right? So now we have the stage rollout, and we've already built with confidence. We're pretty sure it's going to work. So now we're just going to take it to a couple of customers that we trust. Maybe they're the ones that asked for the feature to begin with. And then we're going to make sure we have our monitoring in place and check our monitors, right? And obviously, when things are new, you're going to have a higher focus on what's happening, right? And then if you have less people using it, the amount of data coming in is a little bit less, right? Again, we have AI that can help us kind of get through that data. And then as we bring more and more people into the system, the data, the trend should stay the same. And then the way we're going to scale and improve is based on the evidence, right? We're going to understand if things are being used. Maybe we have a product that starts out really well. People are using it and constantly getting some work done. And then if we're monitoring the right way, we may deliver something else that makes that feature obsolete. And we didn't even really think that would happen. But it turns out that the other feature we deployed ends up taking care of all that. And maybe we need to retire something, right? And so all of those things are valid. And so what we want to think about once we deploy something is that we want to look for ways to optimize our system, right? So that's why we consider the exit criteria here to go into the ready to optimize space. So 3 things that I really want you to be thinking about, right? Shipping is not the finish line. It's really where we start to gather the evidence, right? Machines watch everything so humans can decide on the few things that matter, right? Let the machine do as much as it can, and let the humans focus on the critical thinking aspects of it. The production readiness review is the moment evidence is assembled, not the moment that the work begins, right? We don't at the end start to collect them and go, okay, we don't have a defect. We're doing that as we go, so we're ready. When we say yes, we're ready, we have the email ready, everything gets deployed, we send the email out, everybody's happy. And so what that does is that leads us into next week. We'll talk about turning the live usage into how we compound value, right? Like, how do we build that full loop that we've been talking about? We'll be sending out, Eric will be sending out registration for next week's webinar. I think a couple of them have hit. But if not, go to acceleratedinnovation.com. You can find the registration there. But we'll talk about optimize and evolve. It's the last pillar. And then after that, we'll go into more, we'll continue a webinar series, may take a week off, but we'll go into deep dives on how to use some of the technical things that we've been building, right? Like the discovery engine, how do we use the governance kit and things like that. All right. Are there any questions, Eric? I just kept talking.
No questions at this point.
Sweet. All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.